Welcome. It's just gone 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Wednesday, the 14th of February, and you are watching episode 123 of Regional Wrap. Regional Wrap providing insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, Water for Thee and Thou, is biologist Damien Cook. Damien is the director and senior restoration ecologist at Wetlands Revival Trust. Damien has been a keen naturalist for 35 years and has developed a sound knowledge of flora and fauna ecology, identification, and habitat requirements. He is a recognised expert in wetlands and riparian and terrestrial ecology, particularly in the factors affecting restoration, management of aquatic ecosystems. Since 2012, Damien has focused his efforts on working with farmers and traditional owner groups to protect and restore wetlands on both private and public lands. Welcome, Damien. Now, before we start,
Thanks.
I had to go and look it up in the dictionary myself, reptilian. If you want to give us a bit of an idea what that is, because I don't think a lot of people come across the word, or they know a lot about rivers, but they probably don't hear that term too much.
About wetlands, so the definition of wetlands?
No, the reptilian, the riverbank sort of stuff.
Oh, riparian. Oh, sorry. Oh,
Mhm.
yeah. Sorry, I
Yeah,
didn't quite hear.
sorry.
So yeah, riparian is basically relating to the edge of a river or a lake. So it's sort of riparian means the zone that's sort of, yeah, I suppose the bit that's between the water and the land. That
Yeah,
can either be.
Yeah. I had to go. I went back and had a look in the dictionary and that just to familiar myself, but it sort of goes back to old times and that. But I suppose really it's when people look at uh, rivers and degradation of riverside banks, it is that area that sort of comes into the play mostly because there's usually problems with erosion of riverbanks, or if the water's gone, well, then they also become very steep and difficult to get into. But just touching on why I rang you and to have this conversation, it was an episode of Landline in December where I saw your work on farmland with a couple of landowners. But if you could give us a bit of a brief of your work and who you're currently engaging with.
Yeah, sure. So part of the reason we started the trust was we were working with some farmers, Ken and Jill Hooper, who were dairy farmers from Kahuna, and they'd had a block they'd bought that had actually had water allocation on it, and they'd used it to grow a bit of summer pasture, and it was part of their dairying operation. And but they were getting close to retirement, and as when they and they bought the block. They really loved the trees on the block. With some beautiful big old black box and red gum trees, and the block it's got 11 wetlands on it. And as they're sort of getting more towards retirement age, they started thinking, well, they try and restore this environment, and they sort of started discovering there was rare frogs on there and some rare birds, and they started putting a bit of their efforts into, rather than just farming the land, actually sort of trying to restore the wetlands and the native vegetation, and try and create some more habitat for the rare animals. Like there's growling grass frogs, which are a nationally endangered frog, and the Australasian bittern, which is a bird they reckon's only maybe about 1,000 of them left in the wild. So they knew they had these special things on their place, and I met them actually around 2012. And I was called in to sort of do a bit of a survey for them and look at the condition of the property, because they were looking at then actually sort of retiring the property out of farming, and actually just sort of having it as a conservation area, like a.
You just dropped out.
Sorry about that. yeah, hopefully you caught all that. So it was yeah, they anyway, I came in to help Ken and Jill. They were about to embark on a project to restore a wetland for brolgas, and I said to Ken, he had the design of the wetland all worked out, and I said, well, where are the brolgas going to nest, Ken? They're going to need some plants. And he said, well, you're the biologist. You tell me. He said, you grow me some plants. And so anyway, yeah, I got really involved from then on, and then because Ken and Jill are in their 80s and they actually live about an hour and a half away from the property now. We thought we'd better raise the money to buy it so we could carry on their legacy of trying to restore these wetlands. So yes, that was sort of part of how the trust started. But we now also work with a lot of the neighbouring farms around here, and we've got a project working with farmers all along the Lower Loddon River, which is basically about drought resilience and trying to restore wetlands, but also for agricultural resilience as well. So looking at ways of restoring wetlands, and protecting them when they're wet, but then when they dry out, they can then be used as alternative pastures as well. So looking at how that can actually improve the quality of the farming and the farm incomes. And also some of the farmers have now also sort of started looking at other alternative income streams. So they've even got like little campsites on their properties where they've got these beautiful wetlands. So they get people coming in wanting to camp, and so it's kind of broadened out into a whole range of things really. That there's a lot of reasons that people are, I think, seeing that the wetlands on their farms are really important.
I think one of the problems is there's a perception that they're not compatible, the greeny or the environmental type thing and farming. But I remember, it must be going back nearly 30 years ago, and when the big problem for most of the Australian farming, and that was erosion, runoff is cutting gullies and that in properties, and I remember also I think it was an episode in Landlord, and then I think there was a special documentary, but a farmer was sort of retaining water on his land as wetlands and also slowing down the progress of the runoff, diverting it sort of left and right with little barriers and that, so it ponded a bit. And he got into a fair bit of confrontation with people from the CSIRO and other people that saying, you're stopping the water from getting to the rivers and where it's needed. But have we come a reasonable way now that farmers can have a bit of the best of both of these worlds, A, productive land, and B, good habitats?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are realizing that having the habitats actually can actually be part of a really healthy farm, and that's I think that's a real game changer, because I think there's a whole term for it now. We call it natural capital, and having like you say, native vegetation can help stop erosion. It can increase the health of your soil, look, there's huge areas on the Paru River and lots of parts of outback Australia where on the Coopers Creek where there's sustainable use of and grazing of wetlands, and it's actually it's much better, rather than damming the rivers and letting them be free flowing rivers, but just using the natural cycles and actually, grazing the floodplains at the right time. There's a long history of wetlands being well managed in certain areas. That it can be productive farmland and wetland. It's just a matter of how it's managed. Like a lot of wetlands, particularly, they're most sensitive, I suppose, when they're wet. And if you had a lot of stock in a wetland, they can cause pugging damage, and But it's a lot of it's about having the fences in the right place so you can control stock movements. And once a wetland's dried out, there's no reason why the stock can't go in there. And then actually it's it might be at a time when the rest of the farm's really dry. And then that area having been wet, there'll be good deep soil moisture, and there'll be plenty of green pick there for quite a while. So so it's about, I suppose, just balancing the needs of the environment and the farm as well. But it's certainly possible to manage wetlands in a farming context where you do get the benefits. There's ecological benefits as well as benefits for the farm.
One of the first things we do when we develop any land mass, it doesn't matter whether it's for agriculture, a township, an industrial site, or a city, is we put in drains and to get rid of excess water. And either if we're close to the coast, we dump it out to sea, or if we need a river system, we push it all into a river, which may cause problems downstream. But do you think we need to go back and have a look at our drainage systems that we've put in, and maybe better direct them and utilise the water that we sort of make run away from our suburban areas and our town areas too quickly into main rivers and things like that, and be better off using it more locally?
Oh, look, definitely. I think, Australia being, we're the driest inhabited continent on the earth, and we've done some pretty silly things in the past with our water. Like you say, we put it in drains and run it down to the coast as quick as we can. Whereas, I think, and that's I think a lot of people are realizing now that, particularly, past land uses sometimes, like overgrazing and clearing the land excessively. It's actually caused runoff problems, and, as you say, erosion problems, and we've actually dried out the landscape to a great degree. And there's actually now a lot of incentives and projects where people are actually, like you said before, trying to retain the moisture back in the landscape, and particularly in our urban areas. There's lots of urban wetlands. I think that's become a real thing where we can actually treat the water in wetlands and then store it. Like, there's projects that have happened in the city of Melbourne, I know, where they actually treat stormwater through these rain gardens, and they have these big storage tanks underground where they can then reuse the water on parks and ovals I think that's become probably it's probably only really in the last 20 or 30 years where people have really realised that water is a really precious resource in Australia, and we need to think really carefully about how we use it and how we direct it, and not just put it in a concrete drain and get it away as fast as you can.
Yeah, well, we've had a history of developing along riverbanks and that. There's plenty of cities, regional cities, that are basically wouldn't be there unless the river was there and built around that river. But you got places like Shepparton, I think it's on the Goulburn, and that they've become fairly substantial cities over time. And then of course you've got Bendigo and Albury Wodonga sort of thing on the Murray. Those cities have increased in size over generations, and of course they have more land under asphalt, concrete, tin, and all that sort of thing. So there's a massive runoff that in years gone before that development, they would have puddled around the place and be retained in the soil a lot longer. Do we also have a situation where maybe some of our drainage is overly putting too much pressure on our river systems? I've got a friend who's got a property near Yea, and I think they've only been down there 4 years, and I think they've been flooded out 3 times. Do we put a lot of pressure on our river systems by putting this town stormwater drain straight into the river system and in huge volumes?
Yeah, it certainly does have an impact, and that's the thing that I think that's why there's been a lot of this idea of constructing wetlands around urban areas, basically is to slow all that process down. So it's not just running straight off all those, like you say, all the bitumen, the roads, the hard surfaces that get created by urban areas, and actually so put it, but rather than sort of directing it straight into the river, because that obviously does has a big impact, particularly just downstream. Like you've altered the hydrology of that part of the stream by putting in all those hard surfaces. So and as you say, it's obviously really bad in areas where you get large, like in the cities like Melbourne or Brisbane or whatever. But and I think because it's been a bigger problem there, it's sort of been a bit addressed a bit more. I think a lot of those regional centres now, like I know Bendigo, Shepparton, they've actually started doing things like putting in these stormwater treatment and abatement wetlands. So they're basically slowing the water down and not just kind of directing it straight into the river, but treating it because all that runoff is going to have some nutrients and pollution and all that sort of stuff in it. So you really want to actually trap it in a wetland first, clean up the water, and then slowly release it back into the river systems, or even just let it infiltrate back into the water table. It's because, like you say, before all those hard surfaces were there, a lot of that water would have just infiltrated down through the soil.
Yeah, well, not only that, because you've got a lot of asphalt, you've got a lot of rubber from tyres and that, which is small particle pollution that's probably better not go straight to the river. If we can filter it out, in the system beforehand, would probably be a lot better. Just in regards to the river, I mean, anyone who turns up,
Absolutely.
even people who turned up, in the last, past centuries and that, one of the first things they would have noticed about most of our river system is the meandering of the rivers and billabongs and that. And so most people would get the idea that the riverbanks over time change, and the course of the water changes as well. That is sort of frowned upon now. It's not really helpful when a river changes course, especially when it's somewhere near a township or something like that. The management of our rivers, do we need to pay more attention in regards to the flow rates that are going through them at times to maybe mitigate some of this erosion damage on our banks?
Yeah, look, definitely. I think the way water's managed, particularly where you've got large catchment dams, we've seen this in Victoria, particularly in 2022, where it's we can trap a lot of water in the Hume Dam and the Mitamita Dam, and obviously that's used then for irrigation purposes. But in the situation where there was a La Nina event, and we knew that there was more rain coming, rather than sort of letting some of that water through earlier on, I suppose there's a risk aversity, but we say, okay, no, but we might need all that water, so we're gonna keep it all in the dams. But then the problem is, then we have more and more rain, and eventually it's like, well, we've got to make some airspace, so we've got all that water go, and it all comes down in a rush. So yeah, it's I think there probably are smarter ways that we could manage the rivers in that regard, because it's I suppose we're taking a risk if we do let some of the water through, but the big risk is that if we have to let it all go at once, then and we've already got a flooding river, then it sort of compounds the problem.
Well, it's not as though we haven't got the technology. But it's whether we've got the will and vision to do it. But they're called flood mitigation dams, and like the Brisbane River after the floods in Brisbane in '74, they suggested that the requirement was to build another dam, water and storage, which is Ivanhoe, and then build two flood mitigation dams, one on the Bremer and one further down on the Brisbane River. But those two dams were never built. And subsequently, we had the 2011 and 2019 floods because we didn't build those dams. So there's a role for dams in flood mitigation as well. It's not just storage, but we seem to hesitate to put those sort of things in place.
Yeah, I think that's things sometimes you'll have scientists and people work things out that but I suppose it's there's got to be backed by political will, doesn't it?
Yeah, and commitment to funding. One of the other things too is with the Murray and the Goulburn. Some years ago, it was quite common to dredge the rivers, and there was a lot of people who had license to dredge them and get the gravel and things like that. That seems to be frowned on now. Is that a good thing for rivers not to dredge, especially when what happens without the dredging, the middle of the river can get a bit restricted in depth than that, and there's more movement to the currents, the river flow to the banks, and that does damage. So what's the best proposition for a river? Having a deep center flow, or just leave it natural?
Look, I think it depends on the. I mean, like rivers find their, like you said before, they have their meanders. They find their own way. They'll often have there's what they call the Thelweg, which is that deeper part of the river that takes the water. There are some situations where sometimes there's been artificial sediments that have been dumped in rivers, because of past land clearing or mining, that there's a lot more sediment in the rivers. But generally, as a rule, it's best to let the river. I mean, they've realised this in Europe. I think they used to do a lot of trying to control rivers and confine them and dredge them out, and and I think they've realised there now that by over engineering rivers, you can actually cause more damage than good. And so they actually have programs now where they call it room for the river, and they've actually sort of tried to pull back development from riverbanks, and allow more natural processes to take place.
Well, that's always helpful if we can maintain the banks rather than let them keep getting collapsed, because the banks really provide most of the habitat for the river marine life, and also for the animals coming to shore. If the banks get cut and that, it makes it more difficult for animals to access it. So is part of your work looking at riverbanks and making sure that they're in good order, or how to keep them in good order through putting in vegetation and things like that?
Yeah, so we do we do focus a bit more on wetlands and still bodies of water, but we do actually do some work on rivers as well. So we work with some farmers who are assisting them getting vegetation back in on the riverbanks, and providing advice on where things should be fenced out and that sort of thing to protect banks.
The projects you've been involved in, I'll just go to a screen share, and if you can tell us a little bit about it.
Sure.
This is Kirby Flats, and it looks like a bit of a muddy puddle there or something, and a steep bank on the top photo, and it looks pretty soggy there. Yeah, so if you'd like to tell me about some of those photos there, and what's going on.
Yeah, sure. So that was actually that's a water treatment wetland. It's on the edge of Robinvale, and it was an area where the town levy needed to be reinforced, and so they wanted to get some clay soil from that area there to build up the levee. And one of the engineers involved in the project said, well, why don't we make a wetland? So we need to dig out the clay to form the levee. Why don't we'll form a wetland and we'll actually use it to treat some of the town stormwater runoff. Virtually like what you were saying before about slowing the water down before it goes into the Murray, which is on the other side of that wetland. And there's also agricultural runoff off a whole lot of grapevines and that comes into the river there as well. So there's a drain that goes beside. So this engineer thought, well, why don't we treat some of that agricultural runoff and some of that stormwater runoff? So they created this wetland, and so those first photos you can see where it looks muddy. We've just put a bit of water in the wetland to be able to plant it out. So that's what's happening there. There's we worked with the Taddy traditional owners there. They sort of took ownership of this. They really wanted to. This area, the Kirby Flats, was a really important area for them. It was part of where there was a town camp on the edge of Robinvale, where their ancestors, or even one of the uncles there, Uncle George, he'd grown up there, and so yeah, they had a special connection to that area. So they got involved in helping plant it out, and they've been maintaining it as well. So pulling out the weeds and stuff, and yeah, so that wetland's now really well established. I think there's more photos maybe further down that sort of you can see where. I might have to put some more update the website there, but
Yeah, it looks
yeah, I
like
think you
they're
can see if you.
starting to fill it there, and this is the end result.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, I've got another photo I should put in. That it's really filled out now. There's we're virtually full of vegetation, and we've had swans nesting in there, and yeah, it's become quite a nice little habitat.
I think one of the things with making permanent water, it doesn't matter whether it's like uh, on the ord and that you've got a system there where you've got the dam at Lake Argyle, and then you've got the irrigation dam further down about 55 kilometres, and the Argyle sort of keeps the flow into that 55 kilometres fairly steady and keeps the level up, but to each side of that 55 kilometre run, they've established wetlands. And one of the things with having permanent water, especially in the north, might maybe a bit different down there, but there's always a substantial increase in bird life, in the quantity of birds, and then what's happened also on the Ord, on that permanent water site now, is there's actually additional species that weren't in the area before. So having permanent water is a major advantage, not just for wildlife, but it's also for the soil. But I suspect there's also a benefit for landowners as well, in productive means in regards to their property.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's all different sorts of wetlands too. Like some of the wetlands we work with are seasonal, or they might not be permanent, but sometimes that wetting and drying, the wetting and drying cycle is actually the really critical part of the wetland. So it's interesting you say that. Yeah, that having the water there, it attracts the birds, but it's interesting in this area around here. It's actually the lakes that wet and dry that are the most productive for the birds. So I think that's something people sometimes don't realise. They see a wetland drying out and they think, oh, that's no good. That's actually not a but because in Australia we have these long term cycles of wetter periods and then drier periods. A lot of our fauna and flora have adapted to that sort of wetting and drying, and so yeah, some of the wetlands, particularly the ones that we've been working on with some of the farmers that, the drying out phase is actually when it's productive for them. Then they can actually get some grazing out of it, and then when it's wet, they actually they take the stock out. So so I think it's that's one thing I think it's important to understand that the actually fluctuating water levels in wetlands is actually part of the ecological processes, particularly in a country like Australia where we do have these sort of extremes of usually wetter periods and then drier periods.
I suppose you could have a reasonable part of it, go through that cycle, but there's probably times when you would like like a bit of water in there if it's been a bit prolonged drying period. Could farmers
Certainly drought refuges.
If farmers who invested in this sort of structure and they've still got water allocations for productivity, when it does get dry, could they use some of that water allocation to sustain, just critical parts of their wetland?
Oh yeah, definitely. So that's another part of that project as well. Like so, so we do try to create drought refuges. So there are areas which there is permanent water because some of the sites, we've got like things like the purple spotted gudgeon, which is a really rare native fish. So we can't actually let them go dry. So so we do have water allocations for particular sites where we do have these permanent drought refuges. So you're right, yeah. Those permanent sites are really important. But I suppose the thing is about wetlands is that having a diversity of habitats. So having some that are wet and dry, and having some that are more permanent. It then covers off all the bases in terms of all that diversity of different the different needs of different species.
Well, those permanent areas wouldn't have to be a great percentage to maintain what you want anyway, I would suspect. You wouldn't need to
No, they can be quite small.
Other areas, of course, don't like prolonged periods of being underwater either. I mean, we've always heard about the red gum forest and dying and that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a lot of the problems with red gums also come about because they've got wet feet for far too long sometimes. They need a cycle of drying out and flooding.
That's correct. Yeah. So red gum will only stand in water for about 2 or 3 years, and still be healthy. Once it goes past that, it's not getting enough oxygen, and it'll start to die. So so you can see that in places where around areas where they've put in dams and reservoirs and things where the trees will survive a bit of extra inundation but once they get flooded for too long, and that's where you see some of those reservoirs are just full of dead trees because it's obviously gone past the time that the red gums can stand in the water. So it's they do need that wetting and drying cycle. And the thing is, I suppose, they don't want to be dry for too long, but they don't want to be wet for too long either.
Fussy devils.
Well, they're pretty tolerant, really, when you think about it. I mean, most trees wouldn't be able to stand in water for any more than a few weeks, but they can do it for years on end. But it's I suppose everything's got its tolerance, and it can't go too far one way or the other.
One of the other things that comes up fairly regularly is water quality in the rivers and around the place, and overbank flooding. In regards to overbank flooding, how sort of damaging can that be in regards to the sediment that gets back into the river system on the ecology?
Oh well, I suppose like on floodplains, the problem can sometimes be, particularly on regulated rivers where you've got if you've something like the Murray where you've got the Hume Dam and the Middenbitter and that are actually capturing a lot of the small and medium flows. You're not getting the floodplain getting flushed off, and so you get a greater accumulation of leaf litter in those sort of situations. So then what will happen is, you have something like 2011 where we had the millennium drought. We had a dry period all through the end of the 90s and all through the 2000s. Then we got to so there was there was no little flood, and during that time naturally there would have been little peaks of coming down the river that would have flushed some of the leaf litter off, but because the water was trapped back in the dams all that period, then when you have a big flood comes through, obviously the dams can't hold those big floods. That gets right up onto the floodplain, and then that does wash all that leaf litter and everything into the river, and that's when we have had those massive fish kills, because it's like the carbon in those leaves is important food source, but it's like too much all at once, and it's basically the bacteria that then are breaking down all that leaf litter, suck all the oxygen out of the water, and basically cause blackwater events. So so by changing the way the rivers flow, in some ways, we've really mucked up that carbon cycling. So part of advocating for healthier rivers is to actually have some let some of those smaller and medium sized floods come down and wash some of that leaf litter off the floodplain.
I suppose the other thing is we depend on so few dams. I mean, you're talking about the human minimum, and they've got quite substantial holdings. Sometimes I think we probably buggered it up in regards that we haven't got enough smaller weirs and that along the system to provide the control and allow for better releasing of water, because the thing is they're so scared to let water go because they might need it, and it's all just in one big pile sort of thing. Whereas we'd probably be better off with smaller dams more regularly, and that for different communities. Would that be a proposition that we can regulate the river a little bit better?
Look, it's yeah, I think there's the way the river's managed, I think could be improved quite a lot. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know about building more dams, whether that would be the answer. But look, I think there's ways that we could definitely manage our river systems better by I think there's a whole range of things we could do to improve that situation.
I suppose the thing it's always got to be a trade-off between agricultural productivity and the environment. So it's a conversation that's been going on for some time. Obviously, there's things called ecological flows and that environmental flows, and there's a fair bit of concentration on those. But I suppose if it impacts on food security in the long run, we might be in a bit of trouble. But getting back to your core job, the restoration of wetlands in farming areas, what's the sort of program and what sort of interest are you getting in it from I suppose word of mouth happens when some of these programs come up and other people start looking at it. Has there been an uptick in people interested in re-establishing wetlands on their farming land and integrating both?
Oh, look, absolutely. It's very interesting. We when we first started working on this project, we knew some of the farmers who we thought would be interested, and so I approached them first, and we said, look, we got some funding, we could help help do some work on the wetlands, and very quickly we had their neighbours ringing up and say they sort of seen what was happening on the neighbour's place, and I think there's a real a surge of people interested in this sort of thing. because they can see the benefits, for a whole range of reasons. If there's the benefits to the farm, there's the benefits to the ecology and the wildlife, but also for mental health too. Like, some of the farmers we work with, they say that, the particularly, during dry periods, their mental health really improves when they get to go down and just be beside some water or a wetland, and see some frogs and ducks and things. It's really good for the mental health as well. So yeah, I think it's becoming, we're getting more and more requests now, and yeah, people asking, how they can what they could do with their waterways and wetlands on their properties.
So what type of productive areas are most suitable? Ones that run stock, or is there a problem that is it more difficult on land where they run grow crops, and don't have and probably use more of their land for cropping than what you do when you just run a few cattle or dairy cattle?
Yeah, oh look, so I suppose, yeah, quite a few of the farmers we're working with are, yeah, they have sheep and cattle properties. One of the farmers we're working with is an irrigated that grows irrigated crops, and we're actually using wetlands. We're building a wetland to help treat the runoff coming off the irrigated paddocks, before the water goes into a wetland on their property that's got this some rare native fish on it. So yeah, so I think, but you're right. Yeah, cropping is probably not as conducive to protecting wetlands, especially, there's some areas where, particularly little seasonal wetlands used to occur where, yeah, that, and they might only get flooded once every couple of years. But when they do, they're very productive. But yeah, I suppose in those years that they don't fill, sometimes they get cropped, and that can sort of just damage the values in the wetland.
The other thing is too, I mean, historically, there would have been a lot more wetlands especially in Victoria, and then that's eastern section of South Australia. Do you have access or refer to sort of historical maps or documents to try to pinpoint areas that would be good targets in the future? To at least have a conversation with those owners, or with the government to sort of take up the cudgel for re-establishing wetlands by using historic data. Oops, we dropped out, have we? There, Damien? You just dropped out
Hello?
there. Yeah, you just dropped out for a bit. You're back now.
Back now? Okay, sorry. It's the
You,
light's fading
you,
here, so I'm
yeah, you're,
my
you're a little bit dark there now. But
yeah.
no, I was just referring. I don't know if you heard me, but I was talking about,
Historic.
access, access to historical data and maps and old photographs and things like that of how the landscape was before.
Yeah.
Would they be useful for a more intense program to find land suitable to return to a bit of bounce between productivity and habitat?
Oh, absolutely. That's a really important source. Like, so because we've actually, like in Victoria, we've calculated we've probably lost about 2/3 of our wetlands over the last 200 years. So there's lots of areas that were wetlands that aren't anymore, and we can find them on. There's a fantastic series of aerial photos I've got access to. That was flown just after the Second World War. So in the late 1940s, there's this great series of aerial photography that shows up a lot of the wetlands up until that period, because while a lot of wetlands were drained before then, there's been a lot that have been drained since as well. So that gives you a really good historic data source. but also using things like LiDAR, which is like a laser light detecting radar. So you basically firing a laser down on the ground surface, and it bounces back and gives you a topographic map. Using LiDAR data is also really useful. Yeah, so there's, but yeah, using those historic sources of information is really important.
I mean, I've had a little bit of interest in the last 6 months or that on the lower lakes in South Australia and the ecology there, but also discussing with people who have a bit of history with the area over generations and that. The sort of corridors that went through as wetlands and move water quite vast distances. Um, Instead of it just heading on, people will be surprised that water from Mount Gambier, instead of running off to the coast fairly close, a lot of that sort of made its way down to the lower lakes in the days gone by. Can we, with this technology and history, find sort of chains of areas where we can link these things up and still maintain a reasonable productive area as well, but still get that connection over a long distance rather than isolated pockets?
Yeah, look, that's a really good point. I think as part of one of the things we're trying to do in the Lower Loddon project is to try and improve the connectivity, because that's one of the things, like because of fragmentation, because of draining of wetlands, we have actually stopped a lot of things being able to move across the landscape. Things like frogs and some water birds that. So yeah, so by having these chains of wetlands, or by restoring some of these wetlands, we can actually help to improve that connectivity.
Is there any chance you got interior lights that you can switch on, or
Uh,
you almost all got a torch to shine on your face? It's getting a bit dark there. But we've still got good connection. That's the main thing. Also, we still have the conversation, but
yeah,
it's
sorry
getting a
about
little
that.
bit eerie now.
Yeah, the lights in this car have just decided not to work. So yeah, sorry, I can't really turn anything on here.
Oh, well,
It's just
we can see the light in the background, but we know you're there.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, do you think with more people involved in this sort of thing, or even it being part of a government sort of program of that we can identify really good areas and good pockets and corridors that we can look at, rather than doing a spot here and a spot there, and being a bit hodgepodge, but have a better overall plan? And what would that take? Like, would that take some sort of commitment we could never get out of a government or something?
Oh no, look, I think I mean we've sort of done that to a certain degree just with the landholders we've been working with. So we've got pretty good cooperation with people who can sort of see the benefit of working together, farm by farm sort of thing. So yeah, but there's definitely, I mean, definitely a scope for to get the government involved as well, and yeah, look, I mean that's a great idea, that we need to identify areas where high priority areas where we want to restore the connectivity, and then work with people to be able to figure out a way that yeah, it's not about locking areas up permanently or whatever. It's about about trying to increase the health of the farms, and about, as a consequence, increase the health of the whole ecosystems.
Well, I think the focus should be like on compatibility rather than mutual exclusion sort of thing. But I do know where you can get a heap of help from the universities if they just cut off 10% of their climate change academics and focus them over onto your type of area. We probably get better bang for our buck, because we don't need an extra thousand bloody academics to tell us about climate change. We just need some practical resolution of issues that we're faced with every day.
Yeah, look, I suppose we need the research. We need to we need to know what's going on, and we need to actually implement it though. That's like I hear what you're saying. I think we need to do more practical do more practical things to actually tackle these environmental issues. Absolutely.
We're just coming up to nearly an hour, but can you tell us a little bit more what projects you have got on the books? Are there other groups you're tied to who, like you seem in the work you're doing at the moment, you're looking at an individual lot or dealing with just one landowner here and a landowner there. Is there an overall group that sort of has a little bit more wider scope of activities?
Well, like I suppose in our area, like in Victoria, we have what's called the catchment management authorities. So they're sort of tasked with looking after the whole catchments and the waterway health and that sort of thing. So they can be really important in terms of helping to coordinate different sort of projects. And yeah, look, I think you've got things like land care and the land care networks are really great at that as well, because they're often made up of people who are that already understand the importance of looking after the environmental aspects of their farm. So so there's those community groups who are who are actively working on doing this kind of stuff, and they're often working together not just to improve the habitat or the environmental quality of their farms, but they're also often helping doing coordinated control of pests, like because there's no point, I suppose, if one person's controlling their foxes but their neighbour's not, then obviously the neighbour that doesn't control the foxes, the foxes are just going to spread back into everyone's farm from there. So I think that sort of level of community cooperation is really important. And so I think the land care groups have a lot to, and the land care networks have a lot to offer. There's certainly some fairly active ones down in this way as well.
Well, yours is one group. Do you know of other groups sort of in South Australia or something that are actually working with farmers to do something, or other states?
Yeah, yeah.
Is there a society or a association or something that you all interconnect through across Australia wide?
There is there's a Society for Ecological Restoration. There's that's a kind of a Australia wide organisation or association that's basically like an information source, like so people can go there to get information. But yeah, I mean there are definitely different organisations similar to ours. Like you've got the Nature Glenelg Trust. They're based that sort of southwestern Victoria, South Australia kind of area. So there's certainly different regions have different groups who are working on these sort of in this sort of space. Yeah, there's or like if you did some research on your particular area, you'll probably find there's some kind of organisation that can provide resources to help with this sort of work. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's what we need. It seems to me we need a broader group that sort of got a good overview of, so especially with our river systems, when you keep talking about things like the Murray Darling and all those sort of problems with that, and across the three states, New South Wales, Victoria, and South Australia, it does seem that for the work that you're doing, we need a bit more coordination and maybe a bit more funding for it to happen.
Yeah, well, look, it's interesting you say that. It's I don't know if you realise, but it's the decade of ecological restoration at the moment. So we're supposed to be having this worldwide decade of ecosystem repair and restoration. And one of the things that I mentioned, that group before, the Society for Ecological Restoration Australasia, one of the things that's happening at the moment is pulling together a nationwide restoration plan. So looking at how we can do this in a coordinated way. So we can coordinate things like funding and identify hotspots or areas of that are going to give us really the best efficient use of funds to do this kind of thing. So so there certainly are people thinking about that on that kind of scale. And again, it's just it comes down to having political will and having funding to carry these things out.
I suppose the other thing is too, with your dialogue, you've got to be able to be in a position so food producers and farmers don't feel threatened by these the environmental activities. Obviously, there needs to be a better focus in regards to partnering with farmers and growers and that. Rather than what we see from the government over the from the Murray-Darling plan and other activities, it seems to be bash the farmer type thing. Do you see that as being unhelpful? That that we need to foster that relation that the environment and agricultural production can work better hand in hand?
Oh, look, absolutely. I think it's there's no point being really confrontational about it. Like, I think, I mean, there's I always try and look for common ground when I'm working with people, and I think we need to figure out ways that farmers do an incredibly important job. Obviously we wouldn't have food if we didn't have farmers, and I think sometimes farmers get landed with a whole lot more expectations that they're going to do certain things, or I think if we as a community want healthy landscapes, we need to do a lot more to actually support farmers. And there's incentive programs now where that people can actually as part of their farming practices, they can farmers should actually be rewarded for doing being good environmental custodians. It's we expect that they're going to produce good food for us, and we sort of expect that they're going to look after the country. But I think we could do a lot better in terms of just the way we appreciate the things that the farming community does for the rest of Australia.
I think some of the problems that have occurred is over the years, the people who provide advice to the politicians and the bureaucrats are people who are far removed from the land itself. I suppose you would remember and know in the might be showing age, but you go back to the 50s, 60s, and 70s. There were a lot of agricultural stations, and there were a lot of experts in the field. But not just in the agriculture thing, but also in the forest and things like that. But we've got a situation that sort of evolved over time, where there's a lot more academic input to the bureaucracy and to the political decisions, and we're probably not getting enough real life expertise to these people and getting a better decision. Over your time, have you noticed the sort of the disappearance or the disregard, I suppose, to a degree of people who actually have real life experience, in the field?
Oh, look, I think it's a huge problem where we've lost a lot of what used to be called extension. Where there was people working with farmers, going out on farms, talking to people, and I think there's been huge cuts to that kind of area where, and some of the people that did that had been working with farmers in the same district, so they built trust with people, and they could actually be they were a source of getting information out to people, because I think like I think we need everyone as part of the picture. We need people doing research and scientists and people at that kind of cutting edge forefront, and then we need obviously the people doing practical things that and then and obviously they might be working with farmers, but there needs to be good communication across that whole spectrum. And information's got to flow in both directions. It's not just like a one-way flow, or top down or bottom up or whatever. It's got to be and I think we've lost sight of that to a certain extent. Like I think, like you were saying, back through the 60s and 70s and even 80s, there was a lot more of that kind of extension activities and dissemination, good information getting out. But yeah, I think there's been a real lack of emphasis on that in more recent times.
Yeah, to me it seems
And
like
and
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I don't think there's been a lot of loss of knowledge. Like there's I think, yeah, I mean I know there's certain government departments where there used to be a lot more expert knowledge, but like I don't necessarily see that being kind of replaced as people have retired and moved on, and so.
Oops, we dropped out. You back, are you? Damien, is there?
Yeah. Sorry, it's
You
I think there was
just dropped.
a little glitch again there. Yeah.
Yeah, you're talking about people who have sort of not gone, have disappeared off the radar, and that their expertise is no longer there, and they're just not getting replaced.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's been a huge issue. Like this that so there's that conduit of information going between the people on the land, the researchers, and all that sort of thing. There's got to be that that flow of information, that exchange of information. I think is really important. I don't think there's been enough emphasis on that in recent times.
No, I think in recent times it's more like the government has issued all, it's just continues to issue edicts. You will do this or you will do that based on some information they got, or some policy from maybe an outside group like the UN, like or whatever. But they seem to, when it comes to public consultation for a lot of these decisions, it really is one-way traffic, and things that get up my craw is when you have submissions and that from people. Up in Queensland, we had a guy called Bill Woodward, 40 years experience in woodlands in Queensland, has a range of data and photographs from going back to the turn of the century, how things were, and they're just disregarded. Their inputs just disregarded because the government's made a decision that it wants this to happen, and that's a bit of worry that we're not, even if we do have the people with the expertise and the history in the field. Sometimes the governments are not even interested in hearing it.
Yeah, no, it's certainly a problem. I think sometimes the politics clouds the common good and the best outcome. It's things get politicized and polarized, and rather than looking at things at face value and actually looking at people who have a lot of experience and expertise. It turns out that it comes down to things being turned into political football, or rather than what's the best actually the best outcome.
Okay, look, we've gone over there. Look, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. If you just want to give us a bit of self-promotion in regards to your trust, and a bit of an idea of how you financed, and how people can maybe even help you or get in contact with you. We'll put your website up here, of course, and the overall services that you offer.
Oh, thanks, Bill. Yeah, so yeah, it's the Wetland Revival Trust. It's just and it's wetlandrevivaltrust.org is our website. Yeah, so we work through. We've been to raise the money to purchase the property I was talking about before, the Ken and Jill's place called Rural. We did crowdfunding and got donations, and we still need ongoing support for that property. It's and we also apply for grants and things, but there's a donations page on our website if people feel that they want to donate. There's also a thing for bequeaths and things like that. If people feel like they want to leave a bit of their will to wetlands, there's a part on the page there as well. But we raise money through. We also run we have a consulting branch, so we raise some of the money that gets raised through the consulting. It goes back onto our projects as well. So so we mainly run off the goodwill of the people who we work with. So we're always happy to help people out, and as I say, we do offer services and things like having a look on farms and seeing if there's wetlands there, if we can help with coming up with plans to help increase the productivity but also to protect the wetlands. And we're more than happy to come out and work with people in that way.
Okay, Damien, look, if you just hold on the line, I'll just wrap the show up and just introduce the shows for the next week. And I'll talk to you after that offline.
No worries, Bill.
Right, thanks very much. If you enjoyed tonight's show, please like, share, and subscribe to our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Now, we've got another special episode tomorrow night in regards to the Cairns Council elections, and we'll be having mayoral candidate Paul Taylor, former police commissioner or assistant commissioner, and we also have the incumbent from Division 9, Brett Oles. And next week, join us again on a normal Wednesday night show. My guest will be John Netherly, and we'll be talking about taking a walk and finding a place for a dam. He put in a submission through the former Senator Ian McFarlane, and that went off and was included in the CSIRO evaluations for about 13 dams in northern Queensland. So we'll be talking to him on how he came across this dam site and what expectations for that dam site would be. So join us both tomorrow night or again on Wednesday for our regular show. Thank you.